The night everything came full circle. My name is Dr. Eliana Brooks, and I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, my family erased me from their lives. Not because I committed a crime, not because I hurt them, not because I failed them, but because of a lie. A single lie that my younger sister told, and my parents chose to believe. That lie destroyed everything we once had as a family. For 5 years, they never called. They never asked how I was doing. They never tried to hear my side of the story. To them, I simply stopped existing. But life has a strange way of bringing unfinished stories back together. And one cold evening, in the middle of a chaotic hospital shift, fate decided it was time for the truth to return. The emergency room doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in with a patient on a stretcher. Blood covered her clothes. Her breathing was shallow. Her pulse was fading. "Severe trauma patient," one of the paramedics shouted. "Internal bleeding suspected." Doctors and nurses immediately surrounded the stretcher. The trauma team began shouting medical instructions. Vitals dropping. "Prepare for surgery." Someone called for the chief trauma surgeon. That surgeon was me. I walked through the emergency room doors, calm and focused the way years of training had taught me to be. But the moment I saw the patient's face, my world stopped. The woman lying unconscious on that stretcher was my younger sister. And standing beside the wall, frozen in shock, were the two people who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years. My parents. The dream that started everything. To understand how things reached that moment, you need to understand the dream that shaped my entire life. Ever since I was a child, I wanted to become a doctor. Not just any doctor, a surgeon. I remember being 9 years old when my father first noticed my fascination with medicine. I would sit quietly watching medical documentaries, asking endless questions about how the human body worked. Why does the heart beat faster when someone is afraid? How do broken bones heal? How do doctors stop bleeding inside the body? Instead of getting annoyed, my father always smiled proudly. "My daughter is going to save lives one day," he would tell everyone. He said it to neighbors, to relatives, even to strangers at family gatherings. Every time he said those words, I felt a spark of determination inside me. I studied harder than anyone else in my class. While other teenagers spent evenings hanging out or watching television, I spent mine buried in textbooks. It wasn't easy, but I loved every second of it. My younger sister, Vanessa, was very different. Where I was quiet and focused, she was energetic and dramatic. She loved attention. She loved compliments. She loved being the center of every conversation. At first, we were close. But as we grew older, something began to change. Every time a teacher complimented my achievements, Vanessa's smile grew a little tighter. And little by little, jealousy began to grow where love once lived. The pressure of medical school. In 2019, I was in my 3rd year of medical school. If you've never been through medical training, it's difficult to describe how demanding it can be. The schedule alone was exhausting. Classes during the day, hospital rotations in the evening, and endless hours of studying late into the night. Some days I slept only 3 or 4 hours. But despite the exhaustion, I never once thought about quitting. Because every difficult moment reminded me why I started. I wanted to save lives. During that time, I still lived with my parents. It helped financially, and it allowed me to stay close to the hospital where I was training. Vanessa was already working at a marketing company. She had a busy social life and spent most evenings out with friends. Our lives had become very different. But I never imagined that difference would eventually tear our family apart. Everything changed one evening when I returned home after an extremely long hospital shift. I walked into the kitchen, exhausted and ready to collapse. But something felt wrong immediately. My parents were sitting at the table, and the atmosphere in the room felt cold. My father looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Disappointment. The lie that broke my family. "Sit down," my father said. His voice was unusually serious. I placed my bag on the floor and sat across from them. "What's wrong?" I asked. My father folded his arms. "Why didn't you tell us you dropped out of medical school?" For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" "You heard me," he replied. "Your sister told us everything." I turned toward Vanessa. She was sitting quietly beside our mother. Her expression looked almost sad, but something about it felt rehearsed. "She told me last week," Vanessa said softly, "that she couldn't handle the pressure anymore." My heart began racing. "That's not true," I said immediately. But Vanessa continued. "She said she didn't want to disappoint you and Dad, so she asked me not to tell anyone." My parents stared at me, waiting, expecting a confession. "I didn't drop out," I said firmly. But Vanessa shook her head. "Eliana, it's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to keep pretending." When no one listened, I tried everything to prove the truth. I showed them my class schedule. I showed them my hospital ID badge. I even opened my laptop and logged into the university portal. But Vanessa kept insisting I was lying. She cried. She said I had begged her to keep the secret. And slowly, I watched my parents begin to believe her. Not me. My own father looked at me like I was a stranger. "If you failed," he said quietly, "you should have just told us." "I didn't fail," I shouted. But my words no longer mattered. The damage had already been done. That night, after hours of arguments and accusations, my father made a decision. "If you're going to lie to us," he said coldly, "you can't stay here." I stared at him in shock. "Are you serious? You need time to figure out your life." Within an hour, I was packing my belongings. My sister watched silently from the hallway. And just like that, I walked out of my childhood home. Starting life alone. The next few months were some of the hardest of my life. I rented a tiny apartment near the hospital. I worked part-time jobs to support myself while finishing medical school. And every night, I wondered the same painful question. Why didn't my parents believe me? I tried calling them. They didn't answer. I sent messages. No reply. Eventually, I discovered that my number had been blocked. The realization felt like losing them all over again. But I refused to let that pain destroy my future. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could control: my work. I graduated from medical school with honors. I completed my surgical residency. Years of sleepless nights and relentless training eventually led me to a position I never imagined reaching so soon. At 32 years old, I became chief trauma surgeon at one of the busiest hospitals in the state. My life was stable, successful, independent, but the empty space where my family used to be never completely disappeared. The call from the emergency room. 5 years passed without a single word from my parents or my sister. Until the night everything changed. It was nearly midnight when the emergency pager went off. "Trauma incoming," the nurse announced. "Female patient. Car accident. Severe injuries." The emergency room quickly filled with activity. Doctors prepared equipment. Nurses checked medications. Paramedics rushed through the doors with the patient on a stretcher. I stepped forward to assess the situation. Then I saw the patient's face. For a second, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. But the name on the chart confirmed it. Vanessa Brooks. My sister. My heart pounded in my chest. But years of medical training forced me to focus. Emotions could wait. A life was at stake. "Prepare the operating room," I ordered. The reunion. As we moved the stretcher towards surgery, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Eliana." I turned around slowly. My mother stood near the hallway entrance. Her face was pale with shock. My father stood beside her, completely speechless. They stared at me as if they were looking at someone who had returned from the dead. For 5 years, they believed I had thrown my life away. Now they were watching me lead an entire surgical team. Is that really you? My mother whispered. But there was no time for conversation. Your daughter is in critical condition, I said calmly. I'm going to do everything I can to save her. The truth finally surfaces. The surgery lasted nearly 4 hours. Every second demanded absolute concentration. Finally, the bleeding stopped. Vanessa's vital signs stabilized. She was going to survive. When I stepped out of the operating room, my parents were still waiting. My mother rushed toward me. You saved her, she cried. My father looked overwhelmed. I don't understand, he said. Why didn't you tell us you were still in medical school? I stared at him in disbelief. I tried. Days later, when Vanessa regained consciousness, the truth finally emerged. She admitted everything. The lie, the jealousy, the attention she wanted. She never imagined our parents would believe her so completely. The silence that followed her confession was heavier than any words. Moving forward, my parents apologized more times than I could count. They said they were ashamed. They said they should have listened. But 5 years of silence cannot disappear overnight. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. I didn't know if things would ever return to the way they once were. But I knew one thing for certain. The lie that once destroyed my life no longer had power over me. Because despite everything, I had become the person I always dreamed of being. A surgeon, a lifesaver, and proof that sometimes the best response to betrayal is not revenge. It's success, and the quiet strength to keep moving forward.